Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Timour. I am joined as usual by Benjamin Red. How are you, Ben?
I'm good. We've got a really great podcast lined up today.
Yeah, no, for sure. And this week, and in addition to this new normal configuration that we are joined by Sami Zoughaib. He is a Beirut-based researcher. He is a former researcher with the LCPS, the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, where he was also a podcaster at Alternative Frequencies. How's it going, Sami?
Hey, Timour. Hey, Ben. It's really good to be here with you guys.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I mean, we've got, later we're going to speak with you about, issues regarding the social safety net in Lebanon. First, we have to get to a bunch of news this week, starting off with the vaccines.
Yeah, the vaccines, long promised, they are finally here. Well, some vaccines are finally here. So yesterday, we're recording this on Sunday. So on Saturday, plane flew in, it landed at Beirut International Airport with about 28,000 vaccines, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine on board. And these were distributed to hospitals. And today, on Sunday, we had the very first inoculations. The first person to be inoculated was one of the doctors at Rafik Hariri University Hospital, the largest governmental hospital in the country and basically the frontline hospital for coronavirus. And so the head of critical care was the first person to be inoculated under this.
Yeah, we also had the vaccination of this well-known actor, Salah Al-Tizani. He was actually one of the first people to be vaccinated. He's 90 plus years old and from Tripoli. So I'm wondering if that's sort of, the idea behind that is to kind of get prominent, well-known people vaccinated early on.
Right. Exactly. So this shows, the first couple of people vaccinated was one of the frontline doctors, and then also somebody who is well known, but also in one of these priority groups that are supposed to be first in line to get the vaccine. No, that's not actors. That is older people who are 75 or older, as well, along with the frontline doctors and nurses. And with those 75 years and older, another priority, of course, is people with pre-existing conditions that may have complications. And so it shows that authorities are trying to really show that these vaccines are going to the right people, the people who are the priority right now. I mean, it's only 28,000 doses that we have so far, so they are going to be apportioned correctly. And Hassan Diab actually came out today and said, I am not getting it yet because I am not one of these very top priority people.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting that the outgoing prime minister has decided to very publicly state he won't be receiving the vaccine as one of the first people. And this really, comes after in the past week we've had these multiple reports from people, including Mike Azar, who's a friend of the podcast and a senior financial advisor, and also Lamia Mubayyid, who works with the Basil Fleihan Institute of Finance. And so basically, we've had these people come out and say, we've spoken to people from people who have been in meetings with the World Bank and officials, and the country's leaders have actually sought to have the vaccines first distributed to themselves and to their sort of entourages and people close to them. So we don't have any official confirmation of this, and in fact, we've had some denials. But we do have very credible reports that that this was something officials were seeking to do. And as this is happening, we have the World Bank and the IFRC, so that it's the Red Cross and the Islamic Red Crescent, come out and say that they're actually going to be monitoring the rollout of vaccines, which are funded by the World Bank. And we have sort of very public statements by top World Bank officials, be they the Lebanon representative or the regional representative, Farid Belhaj, who are basically saying that priority groups have to get this first. There will be hashtag no wasta. And that basically means no favoritism or no nepotism. And so we're in this situation where it's there's a lot of questions about the vaccine rollout, and officials, as you said, Ben, are very keen to sort of say no, we're not going to be messing this up. We're going to be going forward according to the plan that we have adopted, which is for healthcare workers, the elderly, and those with comorbidities.
Yeah, and it's very important that authorities do this, that they really try to show that no, that this is going to be done in a transparent way, because they're really trying to get the public on board with this right now. Right now, something like less than 10% of the population has registered to receive the vaccine. And so there's a really, really big question. There are all of these really big questions, about whether we're going to be able to get enough vaccines and all of that stuff. But also then once you get the vaccines, you have to convince everyone to actually take them. And that hasn't been done yet. And so I think part of this as well is just showing people that, no, this is being done correctly. And you can trust us on this, essentially. And speaking of trust, that's not the only area where authorities are trying, or at least seeming to try, to build back a little bit of public trust. Fadi Sawan, who is the lead investigative judge on the Beirut port case, is also restarting that investigation. I mean, it's been already 6 months since the Beirut blast, and really nothing of substance. Nobody has really been held accountable as of yet.
Right, and so after a hiatus of more than 50 days, we saw Sawan come back this past week, and he called in the former head of the Lebanese army, Jean Ahwaji. He called him in as a witness rather than as a suspect, and they spoke for about an hour and a half. We expect more people to be interrogated coming forward, but the big question here is that, if you guys recall, back in December, there was all of this commotion around the decision by Fadi Sawan to charge the outgoing Prime Minister Hassan Diab and 3 former ministers. They were Ali Hassan Khalil, Ghazi Zaitar, and Yusuf Fanianos. And that caused this huge, uproar among ministers, among their parties. The Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister himself, basically said he was being targeted. And there was a lot of pushback against Sawan at that point. 2 of these former ministers, who were also sitting MPs, then filed a motion to have Sawan dismissed, to have him removed from the case. And that is what initially paused, the probe all this time ago. And now, Sawan has resumed the case, and there's no talk of him calling in or bringing in these people for interrogation. You remember, he charged them with criminal negligence in connection with the port blast. And now, we seem to have kind of moved on from that moment. There's been no official explanation of how he's restarting this probe, why he has decided to go forward and interrogate other people when there was already these charges and these in fact hearings scheduled for the for the outgoing Prime Minister and these former ministers. So that I think is something of is a real question mark there of what's happening with these current and former officials who were charged.
Absolutely. And we are still waiting on the Court of Cassation, which is one of Lebanon's top courts, to rule on this. They said, okay, Sawan, you can continue your investigation, but they haven't yet given a ruling, a final judgment. So this is something that could come back and stop the process or slow it down. Yet again, it is just, this potential time bomb just sitting out there. We're waiting for what comes of this whole fiasco.
Yeah, and speaking of this kind of accountability angle, we also have the issue of the assassination 2 weeks ago now, or 10 days ago, of Lockman Slim, the intellectual and Hezbollah critic. And 10 days on from that, we have no new information regarding his death. We have no suspects officially. We have, no official story. We don't have any people charged. We don't have any arrests. Nothing, honestly. We really have nothing. We have nothing to go on except for the information we got on the first day. And, Lockman was laid to rest last week. There was sort of a service at his house in Beirut's southern suburbs. A lot of activists attended. A handful of politicians came through, and notably, I'd say the most sort of surprising in a way person to show up was the U.S. ambassador, because Lockman Slim's family home is in Beirut's southern suburbs, in an area that's sort of known as the capital of Hezbollah, or its area of operations, right? And we had the U.S. ambassador show up there and read brief remarks. And there was a lot of fallout from this memorial. There was a sheikh who is known, and his family are known to be very pro Hezbollah, pro resistance, capital R resistance against Israel, which is what Hezbollah calls itself. And so this sheikh, shows up and he reads Quran over for Salim's soul. And what happens very quickly after this takes place is that you see this massive uproar online on Twitter by people in the pro-Hezbollah crowd. And within an hour, this sheikh has put up a video apologizing for the fact that he even showed up to Salim, sort of this memorial for Salim. And he says, sort of bizarrely, that he didn't even know whose memorial it was. He said he didn't know it was for, and he was like surprised by all the cameras there. And he apologized for making himself the quote subject of suspicions. And this guy, I think many people were sort of surprised by this because, again, this guy is really from a very, very pro Hezbollah background. And very, very quickly online, he was sort of turned into a traitor. People were making comparisons between him and, Israelis, who are like the sworn enemy of Lebanon officially, and of course of the resistance, the capital R resistance. And I looked into this a little bit, and you actually saw then pro-Hezbollah sheikhs and people with a large following, sort of influencers, kind of stepping in and saying, no, listen, this guy is like one of us. He has apologized. Let's move on from this. And I think it's just a sign of how divisive things have gotten and how far we've gone here. The justice minister came out and condemned this. And at the same time, the FPM had also come out and criticized a priest who said a prayer at Slim's memorial. And so, it's just this strange situation where it becomes very apparent again that this, there's no division really between religion and state, or religion and political parties in Lebanon. And for this sheikh to read the Quran, to do what is considered a very sort of moral, religious, in a sense, duty as a sheikh, is suddenly beyond the pale and is no longer okay. And it just goes to show you the level of divisiveness that we have today in Lebanon.
Yeah, and also just tacking on to that, it is, I think, a bit unfortunate that what we have seen, in the week and a half since the murder of Lockman Slim has basically been sort of like this polarization where you can't just take his legacy and look at it on its own merits, but rather it's either you are with Hezbollah or you're with the Americans. So I'm really surprised actually that the American ambassador showed up there, because this is an American ambassador who has been a lot more in the public eye since she arrived last year. And also not just in the public eye, but in the public eye, under Donald Trump. And she was a Trump appointee, and she has been like very much sort of the face of Trump's policies here in Lebanon and for the Middle East here in Lebanon. And of course, with that is, this huge push against Hezbollah, against Iran, this maximum pressure campaign. And she's been the face of that. And so by showing up at this memorial service, essentially, it forces people to sort of like choose, well, are you with Hezbollah or are you with the Americans? Which for a lot of people, I think they would say, well, no, there's a bit more nuance here. Do I really have to choose between these two sides?
Yeah, and I think this goes to the point of what we've seen with all the dozens of people who've been assassinated or have had attempts on their lives in the past 2 decades, almost all of whom were critics of Hezbollah or the Syrian regime, is that many of these people, were complex people, as people are, right? And like Lockman Slim, are intellectuals. He's a linguist. He studied philosophy at the Sorbonne. He's not a person who's sort of a one-dimensional, virulent anti-Hezbollah activist. But in death, these people are rendered one-dimensional. They go from being these very complex people like Lockman Slim to being these one-dimensional sort of cause. They become sort of a cause. And it is really unfortunate when you see what happened with this memorial, because Lockman Slim was an avowed, secularist, and he even, his there was some issue after his killing, because he actually wanted to be cremated after his death and not given a religious burial, a traditional, Shia burial. And so this person who is again, such a complex person is in a way turned into the rope in this tug of war between two sides. And yeah, it is very unfortunate.
And speaking of political murders, assassinations, I think we would be remiss not to mention today, we were recording this on Sunday, February 14th, which in addition to being Valentine's Day, in a lot of places here in Lebanon, it has a very different connotation. Yes, there is the Valentine's Day thing, but also everyone remembers that on this day in 2005, this huge bomb exploded in Beirut, killing the former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, who was we've covered Rafik Hariri before on this podcast. He was a figure who was larger than life in Lebanese politics, and really was one of the main architect of rebuilding the country after the civil war. And so today we will have a speech, televised speech from his son, Saad Hariri. Usually there's a big rally and a big service to remember Rafik Hariri and speak about his legacy. Of course, due to COVID, that's not going to happen this year. It's just going to be this televised speech. But we are waiting for that as well to hear what his son says, because also reportedly his son is not just going to talk about his father, of course, but also mention some stuff related to cabinet formation.
Right, and I'd say that the big difference between this this year and the past 15 years of since Rafik Hariri's assassination is that we now actually have a verdict. Right, there was this special tribunal for Lebanon that spent years working, more than a decade working to sort of deliver a verdict, and they did, and they found a Hezbollah operative, Salim Ayyash, guilty of 5 charges, which include planning and carrying out this assassination of Hariri. But really, it hasn't changed anything, because since the beginning, Hezbollah have said that they are not concerned with this trial. They see it as a farce. They see it as sort of an international mechanism to target them. And they have said, actually declared Salim Ayyash a hero. And I mean, it's also sort of a moment to reflect on what Hariri Jr., Saad Hariri, his sort of political trajectory in the time since. And we see that since his father's assassination, Hariri has formed 3 governments with Hezbollah represented in those governments, and he is currently looking to form his 4th.
But that's not going too well at the moment. As of Monday, when you're listening to this, it has been 189 days that Lebanon has spent without a government, and 116 days since Hariri was designated, which, as I mentioned last week on the podcast, it sounds like a lot, but as far as government formation goes, it's we're kind of in middling, maybe even early territory for this. And it certainly seems as though there isn't going to be any government formed anytime soon. Hariri has been making a lot of trips abroad recently. So he's visited, for instance, Turkey, Egypt, the UAE, and France just this week. Now he's back in the country, obviously. He came back and met with President Aoun in Baabda on Friday, I believe. But nothing came out of this. Aoun tweeted afterwards that Hariri, quote, didn't bring anything new. And Hariri also said, we made no progress. So there's no hope really for any sort of breakthrough, at least in the near term on this. But I'm tired of talking about all of the things that aren't happening here in Lebanon. I want to talk about the stuff that is happening, and there is something very, very important happening right now. Obviously, it's not happening on the government formation level or anything like that, but it does deal with policies and stuff that actually really affects a lot of people's daily lives here. And that is this World Bank program, this loan, this $246 million loan that is meant to help the vulnerable and protect them, given all of the insanity and all of the multiple crises going on here in Lebanon. And that's why we have you here on the program, Sami, to walk us through what this is exactly and tell us what the problems are, because there are a lot of issues, not just with the exchange rate, which is something that has been in the news quite extensively, but on a deeper level, this program is flawed in many ways, you say, right?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Exactly. I think first it's going to be a good idea maybe just to lay down the context of the loan in the first place and what it really aims to do. The loan is called the ESSN, which is the Emergency Social Safety Net, which is a ramp up of an existing program called the National Poverty Targeting Program, which is a program that was launched in Lebanon in 2011, and it basically was giving out vouchers, social services, social assistance to about 15,000 families in Lebanon since 2011. And the current loan aims to expand the reach of this program to reach about 150,000 families, which is about 780,000 people. Also, added to this loan, there will be a $50 million grant that is going to be given from the EU and Germany to ramp up also more and to reach potentially 200,000 families. What these 200,000 families will receive is 200,000 Lebanese pounds every month per family, plus 100,000 Lebanese pounds per member for a maximum of 6 people per family. So we're saying a family will be receiving 800,000 Lebanese pounds, which really, if you think in the context of Lebanon, can be something that saves a lot of families here. Just to be clear, I'm talking here specifically about the first component of the ESSN, which is the direct cash transfer to vulnerable families, which is about $204 million of the entirety of the program. The program itself is a 3-year program. It has 3 other components. $23 million to combat the risk of children dropping out of school, $10 million to strengthen the capacity of the Ministry of Social Affairs, and then $9 million to create and strengthen the social safety net delivery system. However, this first component is going to be over the 12 months period, meaning that the money will be distributed for about a year. And on the face of it, this sounds great. I mean, yes, we are in a situation in Lebanon where a lot of people are suffering. You have got our extreme poverty has tripled over the past year and a half to about a quarter of the population, and our poverty people below the poverty line have exceeded half of the population. So yes, people are in need of something like this. However, the problems that can be observed with this program are many. We have the technical problems, and we have some very deep political problems with it as well. I will start with the political problems. The program in the current political juncture in Lebanon, in which this political elite really is suffering from a complete paralysis of all of their clientelistic channels, which they traditionally use to, buy the support of people, and to finance these clientelistic channels, they needed resources that were offered to them either by the international community or through the debt from the central bank and from the commercial banks, which really ran us into our problem. This loan that comes in now gives these people a breather, gives the political elite a breather. Why? Because it is a 12 months bribe that is going to be given to the people to tell them, okay, our neoliberal policies, our corruption, our greed has driven you into poverty, and now we're going to give you some money, and we expect you not to say anything, right? This is very problematic because it is not sustainable. I mean, yes, of course, giving money to people for 12 months has some benefits, but when these 12 months are done, what happens then? Do these people just run back to being more vulnerable?
So you're saying sort of in a way that this is in effect a stopgap measure, and we've become used to stopgap measures in Lebanon, right? These temporary solutions that end up being the permanent problems in a way of the country.
Exactly, and I think this is a characteristic of the social protection environment in Lebanon in the first place, because we don't have a social protection framework in Lebanon. We don't have like a clear social protection policies. We have the NSSF, we have pensions and whatnot, but they do not fit within a policy that is based on sustainability and that it is based on measurable outcomes. It is rather a fragmented response with stand-alone policies that usually are not sustainable and do not lead anywhere. So the program itself now is also being presented as the only response available. This does not take away from the merit of cash assistance at this point. However, this program needs to be complemented with other sustainable programs that are universal, that help people gain back their trust in the state and subscribe back to the state. So we're talking, for example, you are in a crisis and you have very high levels of poverty and you have your recovery framework, you know how you're going to get out of it. However, for this to start to take shape, you will need like a year or two. So for this year or two, you are going to do these targeted measures that target people to give them money, so you can wait until your sustainable policies take effect. However, in Lebanon, what we see, we're doing these temporary measures. However, the sustainable ones are being thrown out of the window, and this program in the Lebanese context give a justification for the political elite not to do anything else. Right.
But it's sort of a difficult position, right? Because as you said at the outset, 800,000 Lebanese pounds, which today is the equivalent of about $100 on the market, that makes a huge difference for the life of that, of a family. And when you're talking about it reaching potentially up to 1 million families, now with the EU and the Germans providing aid, that is a huge contribution, right? And it's journalists or policy people sometimes have a reputation for being detached to like what the actual needs of people on the ground, and it's very important to say that no, this is important. But your argument here seems to be, okay, great, you've secured this cash assistance program. What do you have to offer in the future? In 12 months we're going to be in the same place.
We're going to be in the same place, and we would have further undermined also the relationship between the people and their state. Because as we know in Lebanon, everything, like, we are trusting the same political elite with $250 million in loan. The same people who screwed up over the past 30 years are being trusted with that much money, which is a generous loan. And you know that Lebanon is an allotment state. It's a state that is built on clientelistic underpinnings. So this loan will definitely, these people, the political elite, will definitely find a way to use this loan and this targeting measure, which is, again, you are choosing who are the people who are going to be receiving the aid. They will be using it to buy the support of the people back. And we have seen this. I don't know, I've seen a few text messages, for example, in which some religious groups are telling their people that, okay, you should go and register for this loan, so we show that, so we can secure our share of it before the other confession secures their share of it, right? So it is already being taken advantage of based on sectarian and political pretexts.
Right. The World Bank and I believe the international community, the context or the atmosphere in which all of this is happening is sort of this atmosphere of extreme suspicion of Lebanese politicians, warranted for their misallocation and indeed theft of funds in the past. And so it's striking to hear you saying that it's going to be, going forward in a way that's very similar to the past. I wonder on what basis do you say that? I mean, I believe the World Bank said that, they had done sort of proxy means testing. They had, assessed the needs of people, that this is actually going to the people who need it most.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the World Bank is setting rigorous mechanisms to make sure that the elite capture is minimized as much as possible, so the potential of this money not reaching its intended beneficiaries is minimized. However, what we see is that the same thing was being said and was being done with the National Poverty Targeting Program, which is the original program that this money is coming to ramp up. However, multiple evaluations of that program show that was not the case. For example, one of the mechanisms in which this was taken advantage of on a clientelistic level is the employment of social workers. So these are the workers that go and actually take these surveys, go and check up on the households to make sure that the proxy means testing that you are talking about is actually representative. And these are the people that the surveyors and the people who follow up on the process, etc. It has been shown in a recent study on the NPTP, National Poverty Targeting Program, that $40 for every $100 from the loan, which was intended for the National Poverty Targeting Program, was being spent on operational costs. big portion of which is the cost of the staff. Okay, now the ratio will definitely be smaller because the loan is bigger, but you will need to employ more people, and these people will definitely be employed based on sectarian and political allegiances. Secondly, there is a high degree of opaqueness when it comes to how you choose the people in the first place. What is this proxy means test? What goes into it? How is the data stored? But basically, people go bring the data, get it on a USB, and then this USB is then shipped to the database, which is in the Prime Minister's office. And God only knows what happens on the trip between the USB, between it going from the social worker to the Prime Minister's office where the database is stored. God only knows what happens there. So there are multiple and millions of ways in which this can be taken advantage of. And regardless of how rigorous you are dealing with a band of bandits. And you do not trust a band of bandits with $250 million in loan, not like a grant. This is a loan that we will be paying back.
So the overall picture here is basically, or the overall worry here is basically that all of this money is going to basically prop up these same actors who have failed the country so many times before for another year or so, that it will be used in a way to reinforce not just sectarianism, as you mentioned, but also the clientelistic networks.
And what we also have on top of that seems to be that it's also with the issue of the exchange rate propping up the central bank or the banking system, right?
So yeah, absolutely. So basically, in any other country, when you want to give them money to the government, you give the money to an account of the government in its central bank. This is standard practice, right? And then it is also standard practice that the sovereign state chooses which currency is going to be used to reimburse this loan to its beneficiaries. So in Lebanon, the World Bank is going to give the money to the government, to the central bank, and the government's account, which is the 46 account, if I'm not mistaken. There, the Lebanese government chose to reimburse the money to the people in Lebanese pounds and not in dollars, because you are in a country where the actual value of dollars is very, very, very high, and the state really can use a few millions of dollars. And this is a decision that the government can actually take. However, the problem is that we don't have an exchange rate. The official exchange rate is 1,500, which is definitely not representative of the value of the loan. So the World Bank asked the government to give them another exchange rate. They give them the rate, the maximum formal exchange rate in Lebanon, which is the 3,900, which is the rate or the platform rate upon which we take our money from the banks. And then they added 60% to that. So it's 3,900 plus 60% of 3,900, which is 6,240 Lebanese pounds. And the thing is, this is not going to be always 6,240. It might increase because the platform rate might increase as well. So if the platform rate is increased to 5,000, then this is 5,000 plus 60% of 5,000, which is another one, a higher number. So this is how they came up with it. However, this is problematic, because then what are you going to do with the money that I am giving you? If I'm giving you $246 million, you're going to print money, give it to the people. There has been no study done whatsoever to test what is the effect of printing that much money and dumping it in the market is going to be on inflation and on our import bill and whatnot, definitely. And I'm going to give you this money, and what are you going to do with it? Most probably this money, this $246 million, will also be used to finance our very broken and ineffective regressive subsidy structure, which everyone is being thrown as like a hot potato from government to government, from minister to minister, from central bank to parliament, because no one wants to deal with it. So we're just going to finance it to $146 million. That will give us another maybe a month or two, and that's great, because this is how things are being operated. We're just delaying the catastrophe and paying a very high cost.
And in this situation, I mean, it seems that with any sort of issue we tackle in Lebanon today, the issues are sort of everywhere, and it kind of becomes even a little bit sort of depressing, continuing to discuss this, frankly. And I think that what's always good is to look at ways to actually improve it, and I think that you have some ideas here of what actually could be done instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first, the main problem that I have with the loan itself is first that it has a lot of political value in Lebanon, and it was not leveraged by the international community to get any reform whatsoever. It wasn't like, I give you the money, but you have to do reform X.
Right.
It was just given for free, right? And if the government itself was the one to put the conditions on it, saying, "Oh, I'm gonna be paying it at the exchange rate that I choose," which is very scandalous. That's the first. However, two, I think this can be improved through thinking about in Lebanon, thinking about how we can set sustainable social policies in which people feel that their subscription is to the state and not to the sectarian co-ops, because people are subscribed in their sectarian co-ops because the state is so fragmented and the social services from the state are so fragmented, so they have to rely on their sectarian co-ops and on their political elite to get these services. So we should prioritize the kind of policies that break this dependence that they have to their sectarian and political co-ops, and build a new dependence that they have a relationship with the state and state institutions. And this will fit within what is called a social protection framework in Lebanon, social protection strategy for Lebanon. And this is a work that has been led and has been started a few years ago by Lebanese national and international community, and also endorsed by the World Bank, which said in its October economic monitor that Lebanon needs this. However, no progress has been made on it, and instead we have this law. And the kind of policies that are included in the social protection strategy are, for example, free healthcare, free basic education, labor market activation policies, because the best way to actually alleviate people from poverty and to combat inequality is to guarantee people an income insurance, right? And these are the sort of measures that Lebanon requires now, not only to make sure that its people are living have a sort of a welfare, but also to achieve a sustainable political change for the country, which is a prerequisite to any reform effort in the country.
Okay, but if you're say the World Bank in this situation, I feel like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You're talking about building these, sustainable longer term social protection strategies, but if you're the World Bank coming in with this money, you have a certain group of people that you're going to be dealing with regardless. If you try to funnel this money instead, to healthcare through the state, well, that system has been infiltrated by the ruling elite. Same with education, same with any state program. The state has been, divvied up between these different factions. So how do you actually cut that cord when there's this level of corruption?
Yes, I agree with you that the World Bank is definitely in a tough spot here. However, we are not saying that the emergency social safety net is not something that should be done. We think that the emergency social safety net is something that should be done. However, it should not be presented as a standalone policy. It should be accompanied with other policies as well. So we have this $246 million, but also to give the government this very politically important loan, then we have to get guarantees from the government that it will work with us on sustainable policies for social protection in Lebanon, and this does not seem to be the case. So you can use that leverage that you have, that you don't seem to be leveraging at all and using at all, to actually make the government to guarantee you that it will start this effort for a sustainable social protection strategy in Lebanon. And the work can start today, Ben. These policies have all been studied. The universal basic healthcare, the universal primary education, free primary education for all. These are things that have been studied. The finances of it are known. So why not start? And this moment requires this. We cannot continue with these piecemeal measures in which we try to get things to work. We need something that is more radical.
It seems like in these days of like extreme paralysis, when I hear you talking about these issues and actually trying to push through policies at this moment, I can't help but think that, or feel usually that, we're in a situation now where nothing is moving and nothing can happen. And I think it is sort of refreshing to hear from your side that actually, no, now would actually be the moment to try and push some of these policies through. It's just hard to see it happening.
Yeah, I think yes and no, because at this moment, how the way I see it is that we have maximum leverage over the political elite, be it civil society, be it the people, be it international community. We have the maximum leverage now because they are at their weakest point. So if we want to try to push for structural change in Lebanon and structural political change in Lebanon, this is the moment, and we need international community to actually contribute with us to this goal, and this does not seem to be the case. I mean, the ESSN is not the only problem. There are other problems in the approach of the international community that should be talked about later on. But what I'm saying is that this moment, some people see it as this moment of political impasse. I see it as this moment of political fragility in which we can once and for all try to break this because we have so much leverage. So yes and no, I think the answer would be.
Well, that's super interesting, Sami. It's really great to know, to have sort of these forward-looking ideas. And we thank you so much for your time. I think we have to wrap up at this point. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the podcast. Until then, I'm Timour Azhari.
I'm Benjamin Red.
And I'm Sami Zoughaib.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.